because I don't have a degree, and I got hired in my first like official marketing role that required a degree because I had a portfolio. I'd built websites for people, I'd done ebooks, I'd done landing pages, I had LinkedIn content I had this whole portfolio, and some of it was paid, some of it was free, some of it was stuff I did for myself, but they were really impressed by the fact that I could actually do the job.
Welcome to the In-Between, a space for anyone navigating from the familiar to the unknown. Whether you're facing a personal, professional, or spiritual disruption, these conversations are here to help guide you through the questions, uncertainties, and opportunities that come with change. Hear from leaders, thinkers, and storytellers who found their way forward, and learn how you can too. No matter where you're starting, you don't have to navigate this alone. Today I'm excited to welcome Joseph Lewin to the show. He's worn many hats over the years, from launching businesses and leading marketing strategies to serving as the executive director of the Wawiza movement. These days, Joseph balances a full life on 5 acres with his wife and 4 kids, homeschooling and building things with his family. So Joe, I was excited to speak with you because you've lived an exciting life full of change, full of unique experiences. Tell us a little bit more about Joe Lewin. Where did you start and where are you kind of right now?
Yeah, growing up, I always kind of thought I would go into full-time ministry, just growing up in the church and being around that. I would say my understanding of what it meant to live a Christian life was to go into full-time ministry and like be a pastor or do something in ministry. And it's like, okay, if you really are going to do something meaningful in your life as a Christian, then that's what you're going to do. And so I graduated high school and I was working actually pulling cable, installing security cameras around the country. That was my first a job as an adult, and I was trying to transition out of doing that into full-time ministry, and I tried a bunch of different times to like go, I thought of going to different ministry schools or just like living as a homeless person for a little while to like share with people. I know I had all kinds of crazy ideas, and I kept kind of getting pulled back into these manual labor jobs that were pretty difficult, pretty challenging to do, and that's kind of how I got started. And I would say probably like a challenging transition period for me was just getting out of high school. Didn't have a college degree, wasn't really interested in going to college. I didn't know what I was going to go to school for, and really struggled for a little while to figure out, well, how do I do the things that I feel like I'm called to do, but still be able to make enough money to pay my bills. And they, got married during working a lot of those kinds of jobs. And so like, okay, how do I provide for my family and, all that kind of stuff.
How did you kind of come to terms with never maybe landing in what most would consider a standard, regular, normal, full-time ministry role? With that being something that you desired, how did you come to terms with that not happening, and what were you feeling or thinking like in the midst of that? How did you decide to be okay with that?
Yeah, I think time is probably the best answer that I could give for that. It took me a long time, probably a lot of years, 5, 6, 7 years, I don't know, of doing that kind of work, and being pretty frustrated with that kind of work, and at different points in time really trying to launch into doing some kind of full-time ministry. And I think eventually I just realized there's actually a lot of value in just doing work. In my case, doing work is under the Lord, no matter what it is, and having an approach to life as being, I'm on mission no matter what I'm doing, and anybody that I'm talking to or anybody I'm interacting with, I'm on mission in doing that, and it doesn't have to be a title or a role or something official. And in fact, the most ministry stuff that I've done is as the executive director of our organization in Kenya, and I'm not paid to do that, and it's really just a volunteer thing, and that we're doing. And so of all the things I've been most successful in ministry, the one that's not full-time is actually the one that's been the most meaningful and the most impactful, both for me and I think where we've had the most impact also. And so, yeah, I think it's just a journey of figuring out that it's not about what other people think about you. but
Mm,
whether or not, you're okay with yourself, and, if you're a Christian, then if you feel that God is behind what you're doing and he's moving in your life, whether you're in full-time ministry or not, and he's not as concerned about our titles or who's
mm,
writing a paycheck to us as he is about, our obedience, or whether or not we're following what we feel like he's showing us to do.
mm.
Um, Sometimes takes a lot of time though, I think, to work through that.
How much did the early days of Wawiza and maybe the ministry leaders or the individuals that you were working with over there, I really don't know how many of them were bivocational or doing it out of the goodness of their heart. How much, as you observed their ways of life, did that influence how you looked at your role in ministry or ways that you would approach it as someone that just viewed work as something as unto the Lord, regardless of you had a title of pastor or were being paid for the ministry that you were doing?
Yeah, that's a good question. I haven't really thought of that before. I would say that when we first started working with there, we were working with somebody who, I mean, we still work with him, but he is a full-time ministry guy. He's a pastor and oversees a bunch of churches. We don't usually use the term bishop here, but there they do. He's just an overseer over a bunch of churches that he's started. But he has always had kids living in his, like, kids that aren't his, living in his home that he's taking care of, that were in desperate need, and he's always gone way above and beyond what
Mm,
the role or title was for what he's doing. And um he's crazy. He gets up at like 5:30 every morning and goes and prays for people in the prison and the hospitals and stuff
mm,
before. I mean, it just, yeah, pretty kind of going beyond the normal role type of guy. But as we continue to progress there, I think that um, the more that we worked with people who had a valuable skill set and hired them in to come and do a job where they were passionate about what they're doing. But like our main director there, who's overseeing a lot of our projects, he has actually, I think, two master's degrees, and he's really passionate about the kids. And I think that he probably early on thought he was going to do full-time ministry himself, but
mm,
now he's getting paid, by their standards, really good money to do a job that's extremely helpful and valuable. Now, I mean, it is in a nonprofit, so it kind of is, you know, still in that realm, but he's doing a lot of actual work. And I think seeing that, the value and impact that he's able to bring there, just helps me to understand that it's like way more about the value that you're bringing, whether it's in the
mm.
marketplace or whether it's, in a ministry setting or in a mission-driven organization. Are you bringing value, and are you, setting yourself up to, um, yeah, I don't know totally where I'm going with that. kind of shooting from the hip.
I think that's good. As you think about the different transitions, the different shifts that you've experienced, were there specific challenges that stand out to you that helped you maybe get a grasp that a shift or a change was around the corner? Do you see any threads or through lines that stand out to you related to that?
Yeah, I'd say that there's probably two totally opposite ways that I've seen transitions
Mm,
happen for me personally. One is I start feeling ahead of time like there's some transition happening, and sometimes that gives me the idea that, hey, I need to be preparing for this. And usually that's more like, so I swept chimneys for 5 years. That was one of the manual labor jobs I did, and I hated every second of it, but I made good money while I was doing it, and that was kind of the first job I worked where I actually made pretty decent money. And so it's like, okay, just practically, it's nice when you're getting a paycheck and it's decent, right? But I was just dirty from head to toe, hauling bricks up to people's chimneys. And I realized, man, I don't want to do this forever, right? And
mm,
so kind of felt just, I would say that's probably more internal drive to do something different than that, and recognizing, hey, I need to get a set of skills that I don't currently have, and just starting to like slowly work towards that. And then the transition is more gradual, and it's like very intentional for me to be working towards those things. And sometimes it's been more like, hey, I feel like something needs to change, and then starting to work on that. An example of that would be my previous job that I landed. Um, I knew that the job that I was in, it was a marketing job. I was a product marketing manager, that there wasn't really any upward mobility where I was at. My boss at my previous, my boss at the time, he's still in that same role. He still has that same title that he had when I was working there. So I was right in that there wasn't really an upward movement. So in that case, it was like I kind of saw that I needed to do something. And so I started a podcast. I started interviewing a bunch of marketers in the space, and with the intention of building a network to land my next role. And I ended up interviewing my future boss on that show, and he was like, "Hey, I have this role opening up," and I got a 40% increase in pay, way better opportunities since working there than I would have had otherwise. So it was like sometimes seeing that there's something needed to change and make those transitions. So that's number one. Number two is something just completely goes off the rails, in life. It could be a personal situation or a work situation that just completely, I'm kind of in the middle of those right now, and I'm still navigating what the transition looks like. But in April, my role was eliminated at that company because the market really shifted. We were serving a certain type of company, and every single one of those companies is like, yeah, we're cutting all of our budgets. We can't be putting any money into this stuff. And, if you're just not bringing in enough new clients, then there's not enough work, right? And so that was more of a sudden transition, one that I wasn't really anticipating happening. And those ones are, I think, a lot harder to navigate because you're all of a sudden having to ask all these questions of like, what am I supposed to do? Do I just go get another role? Is this the Lord showing me to do something different than I've been doing? Is there, so anyway, there's the long feeling ones where you're kind of able to work towards it. And then some of those ones where it just slaps you across the face and you're like, I guess I'm transitioning now.
Yeah, those are important to call out though. There are those, like you said, that are just, there's this internal desire or want or drive, perhaps. I know for me, when I transitioned out of the ministry role that I was in, that was a 2-3 year process where I was asking a lot of what if questions, considering, thinking, and I'm not saying it has to or should take that long, but there was a lot of desire inside of me. And then there are those times where it's almost out of your control. It is out of your control. And you're kind of left, I don't know. Are you left with questions? Do you have more questions in one scenario or the other, or are you just asking different questions in each of those, whether it's the internal driver or, hey, this situation just affected me and I don't know, it was out of my control. Same questions or different questions in both of those experiences?
For me personally, it's definitely different questions. Like when you have a sudden transition that's outside of your control, for whatever reason it is, I think it makes you ask all kinds of questions about yourself, your identity, or being frustrated with the other people and getting into blaming and anger or whatever.
Hey friends, I want to pause just for a moment. If you're navigating the complex and emotional process of leaving a mission-driven role, whether that's been ministry, nonprofit work, or any purpose-driven career, you're not just looking for a new job. You're wrestling with things like the personal, professional, and spiritual dynamics that come with all of this. Maybe you're asking things like, who am I outside of this role? What skills do I even have that can translate into the future? Will I ever find work that feels meaningful again? If this is resonating, download Finding Your Way to Flourishing. It's a free guide that I've put together for mission-driven leaders who find themselves in the midst of transition. This isn't just another guide. It's a thoughtfully crafted resource that's designed to help you begin processing your identity beyond the role that you're leaving. It can help you pinpoint which skills you can confidently bring into your new and next role. It'll help you lean into your faith and find peace during the midst of this uncertainty. Not overwhelming, it's not complicated. It's just the first step to getting some clarity and moving forward. You don't have to figure this all out alone, and I'd love to walk this journey with you. This guide is completely free, and you can grab your copy today by clicking the link in the description or in the show notes. let's start making some sense of this transition together. Okay, now back to the conversation.
I think it's a lot easier. I mean, just much more likely you're going to have a very emotional experience when something sudden happens. And that's totally normal to feel that way, right? And my bosses that I was working for, I love them. They're great people. I know that they didn't want to have to lay me off at the time that they did. I was in a non-customer facing role at that point, and so it's like, okay, mine was the right role to cut because the other people are delivering for clients, and I had stepped out of client delivery and was working on other stuff in the business. So, and so anyway, I understand that logically, but still, it's an emotional experience to have that happen. And it doesn't feel good, and it does make you go like, man, what's the deal? And yeah, I mean, it kind of can set up a whole course of events that kind of you can have all of your house of cards all nice and perfect, and then you pull one out, and it can really cause all kinds of things. So I think for me, it brings up questions of, am I good enough? Adequacy. Am I, what do I need to do different? And then, on the more positive side, like, hey, is this an opportunity for me to make a change, for me to do something different? Is this a time for me to start a business, or is this time for me to switch out of this industry or vocation altogether and, kind of explore something new? And I think whenever you go through something like that, it's really good to ask those questions. Like, that's the prime time to ask those questions and realize, like, hey, am I going in the right direction, or is this kind of a wake-up call that maybe I should do something a little bit different than I did before?
How do you stay in the healthier side of those questions, especially if there's circumstances that were outside of your control, and like you said, they bring up those questions of identity and am I good enough, and could I have done something better, or do I have anything to offer? What, like, how do you stay in the healthier side of those sets of questions?
I mean, I think for me, that has been a long time for me to get to a healthier place with that. I think most of the time early on, I really internalize those things. And then as I've had really frustrating situations, especially with other people, happen, you just kind of learn that, yeah, I guess you get tougher skin and you go, this person's opinion is not the end all be all. That your boss or somebody that you respect in leadership or whatever, like, their opinion, I'm not saying it's not important, but it's not the end all. And so, as a Christian, you have to have your identity rooted in something much deeper than that. And if your identity is rooted in your vocation, in your title as a pastor or ministry person or whatever, you're going to really struggle if you go through that. And I think that's totally normal to do that. So if you're experiencing that, that's a totally normal way to feel. But I think once you've experienced it, some kind of really difficult transition, especially when people are involved, and people maybe do the wrong thing, or even when they don't, it's just still difficult not to feel angry. For me, it's just working through, okay, my identity and what I'm called to do, and my purpose is clearly shifting, and taking a more practical approach to that, to go, like, what needs to happen next, and then maybe in the moment, but probably even more so, like, down the road, looking back introspectively to go, what could I have done differently? Was there something I could have done to be more effective, or to have handled this situation differently, or whatever? But if you're asking those questions too much in the moment, you're just too close to it, and you might be getting way too much input from other people who are also going through an emotional experience, and might be projecting things onto you that aren't real, or aren't good.
When I made a big shift and transitioned out of my ministry role, and then had about a year and a half of just, I was freelancing, I was working actually for about 2 years. I went and worked for another company. I was doing some freelance work. But one advantage of that time is I slowed my pace a lot. I intentionally tried to slow down. You've worked in a lot of fast-paced roles, I would consider. You've managed marketing campaigns, you lead organizations, you have a growing family, like, all of that's fast-paced. Have you tried to slow your pace in any of these transitions, maybe even particularly in the most recent one? Was slowing down a part of your journey? And if so, like, how? Because when you're used to, like, doing and going and performing and, just working, how do you slow down? The reason I'm asking is because slowing down is so valuable, because it's in that time that it gives you the opportunity to explore some of the questions that you just raised. You can't really give those questions the attention that they deserve if you don't slow down. But for high performing individuals, sometimes slowing down is hard. And so you may never even get to the point of asking those questions.
Yeah.
So how do you slow down?
I think it just depends on the type of transition that you're going through. If you have time to make decisions and you have time to work through it, then 100% you should really work on slowing down. And I could give a couple ways that we do that and try to make slowing down part of our life in general. But if you're going through a sudden transition, I mean, for me in this last season, no, I have not slowed down at all because I can't. And I've been working on starting a business and I'm trying to figure out whether I can make that viable or not, and might have to go get a full-time role again for a while and build this up on the side. And it's like, just because of where a bunch of different converging circumstances, I didn't really have any time to slow down. It was like, hey, unfortunately, we got to let you go, and we got like 2 weeks left to pay you. I've got 2 weeks. That's not enough time to go land a role at that level in any way, shape, or form. So kind of thrown into having to, okay, I got to go start selling something now so that I can, keep things rolling. And so it's been like not at all slowing down in this last little season, which makes it way harder. I mean, I think it's not the ideal, right? Ideally, you kind of see that transition coming further out than what I did in this situation. And kind of to your point, and I've had that in the past, like what I said about when I was sweeping chimneys, like I listened to hundreds of audiobooks and like probably 1,500 podcasts while I was driving in the car 3 hours a day and building this skill set that I knew I would need to do something different in the future. And I had time. I mean, I did it for 5 years. So kind of had time to work through that and work towards that over a longer period of time, which is ideal, right? And if you think that there's a transition coming, start thinking about these things now if you have any inkling of that, because you're way better off. As far as how do you slow down? I mean, one way is just to, if you can, just quit what you're doing and go do something different. And sometimes that's really helpful. And I mean, as hard as that is, I mean, my wife and I had the benefit of doing that before we had kids, because we went and lived in Kenya for about 6 months, and then we traveled in Europe for a minute after that. So we just worked super hard, saved a ton of money, and we just went there, and it was awesome. It was a great time because we really did slow down our pace significantly when we were there. And that's just kind of part of life in Africa, is your pace is always slowed down just by the nature of how life is there. And it was great. And I think we did get a lot of clarity through that time and what we should be doing next, and even not doing full-time ministry and not going back to live there full-time, because we were thinking about doing that. And it just became clear, no, we can bring more value by making money, building relationships here, and helping to fund people who actually know what they're doing there on the ground. So I think if you can do that, that's killer. And then as far as how do you slow down in the middle of busyness, you just got to do, you got to be less worried about what other people think and just do less stuff. And so we don't really do a lot in the evenings during the week. We don't go out and do almost anything. And so my wife and I spend a lot of time just hanging out together after the kids go to bed, or we started walking a lot together without the kids, where we're going on a walk for 30 minutes to an hour today, and we're just getting time talking with each other and talking through all of these things. But we can only do that if we're not doing everything else. And then one last thought on slowing down, something that we kind of ebb and flow at how good we are at doing this, but taking a Sabbath and just saying, hey, I might work, but God's ultimately my provider. So I could work 7 days a week and still never have enough. Or I can say, hey, I'm going to take 1 day a week where I'm not going to work, and I'm not going to be thinking about work, and I'm not going to be, trying to stack on all the things I can. I'm going to say, I'm taking this day to rest. And doing that makes, and to like turn off your phone, turn on, don't get on social and everything on that day. And that one thing can really help you slow down, and even in the midst of a very busy, stressful season.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it brings to my mind like the exploration of values, and even in the midst of busyness, sometimes in situations you can't slow down, there are still values that can help guide your decisions and habits during those times of busyness. And for me, I know clarifying my values in this process. Now, thankfully, I was able to clarify my values in the midst of slowing down. But I really think it could be a fast process. I think if you really sat down for 10 minutes and said, as an individual, and when I think about the type of work that I do, and when I think about the type of people that I want to work with, what are the 5 things that come to mind? And you could probably jot those down pretty quick, even in the midst of a busy season. But I think values play a huge part in clarifying and, um, helping to shape how we navigate this transition and what we head into next. How to me, when I look at you, Joe, it seems that family, your ability to be creative, your ability or your desire for autonomy, though, just as an outside observer, those are things that seem like are maybe values that you hold. Are there specific values or principles that have become more important to you during these transitions?
Yeah, I'm just kind of pausing there because you said autonomy, and I don't know where you came up with that, but it's definitely something that's super important to me. So good catch on that one. Um, yeah, anyway, that's just like something that actually is extremely important to me. Probably shouldn't be as important as it is, but
Well,
uh,
I see autonomy as a good thing. That was one of the values that I listed. I want to have autonomy in the sense of the individuals that I work with. I want to have the freedom to make decisions. Let's get clear on the goal. Let's get clear on the expectations. But I want autonomy about how I'm going to perform and execute on that.
100%. That's extremely important to me.
Yeah, and just seeing all the different things that you like to explore and do, even in the midst of the role or the jobs that you may have, that was just something that stood out to me. So I mean it in a
Yeah,
good sense.
good call out. Yeah, as far as values that have become more important, I mean, these are obviously shaped by my worldview and biblical worldview. But to me, we've been trying to talk through what are our values as a family, and the first one is just the kingdom comes first,
Mm,
and we're going to be people that pursue God's kingdom above what would normally be naturally important to us, and that those don't always they're not always opposed to each other, but if they are, which one of those things is going to win out? And it doesn't mean we
mhm,
don't go on vacation or don't go do anything fun. We certainly do, but just if we're going to make a really big decision, the first thing we're going to ask is, are we doing this for the kingdom, or are we doing it just purely for ourselves? And
mm,
another value that's super important to us is building around the family. And so a term that I've been introduced to lately is like multi-generational family, as
mm,
in like involving our parents and hopefully building enough of a relationship with our kids through the way that we raise them and the values we instill around the family table and all of that, to
mm,
where they want to be part of our life as they grow up and
mm,
be involved with our grandkids and things like that. So then that's another lens that's really important as we're making these decisions and transitions, to go, hey, if I go pursue this thing, whatever it is this going to help, is this going to move us closer to serving my kingdom purpose and our family, our household kingdom purpose? And then also, like, is this going to grow us as a family? Is this going to bring us closer together? Maybe in the short term, you got to do what you got to do, but like, let's just say over the course of the next year or 2 or 3, is making this career decision or making this vocational change, is this going to help us as a family to grow together,
mm,
or is this going to pull us away from each other and, maybe build my career, my reputation, the things that are important to me, but
mm,
pull me away from investing in my kids or whatever. Those are probably the two biggest ones. And then yeah, rest is really important. Like, are we actively taking time to rest and restore and not overdoing it by trying to please everybody and go to all the things all the time?
I think though, you sharing those points out that when you get clear on your values, it really does help make the decision making process a little easier because you know it's important to you. I mean, obviously, like there's times where you just got to go to work, you got to get the chimney sweep job,
Yeah.
you got to do the things sometimes, but even in that, when we understand and get clear about what we value, man, it can make our decision making process so much easier.
Yeah, to tie on to what you're saying there, that I think is a really key point, is you also just have to be practical sometimes. Like, if I'm not getting a clear answer on something, then I just need to do what I feel is the right thing to do. And you got to make that next best choice based on what you know. And I feel like a lot of religious people, a lot of Christians really struggle with that, where we want to get a really clear answer, and sometimes you just don't, and you're not going to, and you have to trust that God's going to move in your life and in and through your circumstances in ways that go way beyond, an audible voice or something like that. And I would say I've had a few times where I've gotten very, very clear. I've had dreams where I've gotten direction before. I've had other people tell me things that they had absolutely no way they could have known that without, God showing them. And when those things happen, it's like, well, that was awesome. But that's not the majority of the time. The majority of the time, you've also got to just be practical and go, hey, I got to feed my family. I have to have skills to do that. And so what are those skills and how do I go gain those? And then when you line that up with your values, then you start gaining skills or working on practical things that are moving you towards closer to being who you want to be, closer to those values, rather than making those practical decisions alone. That's going to lead you away from your values, or just trying to lean on your values alone. You're going to end up in the poorhouse, just depending on other people all the time, because you won't have been practical with those values either.
Yeah, no, that's great. I'm glad you called that out. So one thing that you've been able to do is identify which skills and experiences can help you add value as your life, career, vocation progresses. How have you done that? How have you identified which skills you want to build and which ones are important for you to continue to hone as you move towards the future?
Yeah, I think if you take an approach out of the marketing playbook, I didn't necessarily do this intentionally at first, but where is there a gap in the market that other people aren't focusing on? And if you focus there, there's opportunity. And so talk to people who are in the spaces that you want to be in and start asking them questions about, what are the biggest challenges that you run into in your job, or you could even just be as blunt, if you have a good relationship with somebody, to say, like, man, when you're working with people in your career field, who are the people that are like killing it, and who are the people that you just really don't enjoy working with? Tell me about them. What are the skills that the people have that are super successful, and what are the ones that don't? And to me, like, some universal things that you can look at, no matter what your background is if you can build connection with other people, real, genuine connection, and make people, I don't want to say make people feel valuable, because you can do that in a very manipulative way, but if you can value other people and make them feel that you value them at the same time, that has real value in the market. Like, if you're going to sell anything, if you're able to make genuine connection with people and really truly look to add value to them, the top salespeople do that. And if you've been in a pastoral role and you're really great at seeing the needs that people have and connecting with them, that skill is 100% transferable to sales or communication or customer service. There's all kinds of things where that specific skill set comes into play. And then another one is just going to be communication itself. Like, if you're able to work on your communication skills through writing, I'm going to say this to anybody: record yourself on video 1 minute every single day where you're trying to say an idea, and then go back and watch it. And once you really get into it, you can edit it a little bit and then start publishing it. I don't care what it's about. It doesn't matter. It could be about what you do for work. It could be about, to go outside and look at leaves and talk about them. I don't care. But just the ability to be on camera and talk is an extremely valuable skill that translates no matter what industry you're in. You could be working in engineering and biotech and, software, but if you can get on and communicate through video, you can get paid to do that. And then the other piece with that communication is structuring ideas. And this again kind of goes back to if somebody's coming out of a pastoral role, you've been doing that, right? You know how to go study scripture, how to look through something, go research it, study it, and then how do you structure that in a way that other people are able to understand something really complicated in a simple way. That's what you do in marketing. Like if that's what you do in sales. That's what you do in customer support, or in these different titles that you might be looking for. Making that transition is to be able to simplify these ideas down and communicate them clearly. So if you're able to do that now, all that you're changing is the material. So instead of studying scripture, you're studying model-based engineering, and you're doing the same thing. You're going and finding the manuals and digging into it. You're interviewing people. You're talking with engineers. You're studying the stuff, and you're taking that idea and you're bulleting it out, and then maybe you put it into a presentation, or maybe you put it into a blog post, or you record it on video, and that is a very translatable skill, in my opinion.
Absolutely. It's funny, I'm a part of different groups online, and it's so common for pastors to feel like they don't, or people coming from ministry roles or who've served in nonprofits to feel like, well, I don't even know where to start. And it is true. Like when you're going out into the corporate world, they're kind of asking the same questions. Like they probably don't care that you pastored a church, but they may care that you were able to grow a volunteer basis by 50%. A lot of times we just we're confined by the language that we're familiar with, and you gotta find ways to bring to life by actually describing the impact and the change that your skill sets brought to the table. So there's so many skills that ministry leaders, nonprofit leaders possess and have, and you laid out several of them. Are there others that come to mind to you? For me, I think of how relational individuals can be. People who have high relational skills. I think of the ability to juggle tasks, to multitask, to build teams, to project manage, to build a budget, to market, to get people to an event. We just think of these as things that we do in the church, but they're actual skills that people need in the marketplace too.
Yeah, I mean, and I'm going to have a bias towards marketing because that's kind of been my background, but I just think ministry stuff tends to fit really well with marketing or sales because there are a lot of the same skill set. So, I mean, you just said, getting volunteers and bringing them together to these events, right? And getting them to do something. It's like, well, hey, there's entire jobs that are just managing events and putting them on and getting people to do different tasks at those events. They're not volunteers, they're employees. So you actually have even more say over what they do and how to utilize their time. But if you're able to put on events and you've done that, there's a whole specialty skill set in doing that. And people pay. I mean, I've talked to people in the last year who paid $1 million to go to one event and put it on. And I mean, they're not even putting on the event, between their booth and the dinners they host around it and all the, prep and materials and marketing. I mean, $1 million around one event. So if you've put on some massive, kids back to school event at your church and you've done that every year, that's actually really valuable skills involved in that. The logistics, how you find the right people, you get, anyway. So that would be one. And then another thing that you mentioned that really, another skill set that I think is universally valuable is asking good questions. So if you think of counseling, and if you've done any kind of counseling, if you're good at counseling, you're not telling people what to do. You're asking them questions that get them to to, talk about things and reveal things. And a lot of times what happens, like they go, oh, our marriage is struggling. My wife doesn't ever do X, Y, Z, and it's so frustrating. And you start digging in. Oh man, tell me more about that. And you get down, and all of a sudden they're like sharing something that's an actual issue that you can resolve, and you're like, okay, now we're actually getting there. Well, that gets into like customer research. That's what you do in a sales discovery call. That's what you do when you're interviewing people for marketing content. You're asking all the same kinds of questions. The content is different, but the skill set is exactly the same, where you're, instead of talking about their problems in personal problems, you're talking about their business problems. But you even can use almost the same question set, and use it for customer research.
So how do people begin to be able to identify and articulate which skills? It's one thing to have a skill set or to be competent in something. It's another thing to carry things with you that just light you on fire and bring joy and purpose to your work. How do people begin to identify those things so that perhaps in whatever they do next, they're able to continue to find purpose or fulfillment, joy in the work that they're doing? Aside from things that they may have become competent in, the things that they really feel motivated and driven and fulfilled by doing, how do they begin to articulate and identify those things?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, I would say the first thing, part of why you enjoy something is just because you're competent at it. The more competent you are at something, this is not always true. Like, I am competent at certain things that I hate doing, and that's a really good indication that maybe that shouldn't be an area that I focus on. Although sometimes you have to, just to get started, and a lot of times entry-level roles suck. You're doing all the work nobody wants to do. So sometimes you just got to do that and realize that that's a stepping stone towards the real opportunities that you want to do. But the more competent you are, and then the more you're able to communicate in the language that other people use, the more confident you feel and the more valuable it's going to be. So one thing you do with that is start listening to business podcasts or trying to immerse yourself in business language, because just having business acumen, that is probably the hardest skill for me to learn, because you really only learn it if you're in a master's degree program or if you're working in the corporate world. And so then your only interaction to that otherwise is if you're able to get into those environments and you either have a friend and you go, what is that? What were they talking about? Or, you look something up really quick, but you've got to be able to pick up the language that people use, just like people use terms in the ministry world, they use terms in the business world, and that those terms change based on the industry. And so those, you'll kind of have to figure out what industry or area, and then, the specific terms for the type of role you're in, if it's marketing or sales. But then there's also just kind of universal business language also, that if you're able to figure that out and speak that language, I think you'll feel a lot better. I know it didn't directly answer your question, as far as what you want to do. I think it's just exploring different things and maybe trying to take a skill that you have right now and translate it into something that's not how you're currently using it. And then the next step from there, if you have time, like we talked about earlier, if you're not in those immediate transitions, you've got the time and you should do it now, try to get paid for that skill. So for example, if you're great at structuring ideas and you write sermons, start trying to structure an idea that has nothing to do with that. Take a business, go to a friend of yours who runs a business and go, hey, I really want to try to use the skill set I've learned to clarify messaging. Can I work with you just totally for free to try to help you with your messaging on your website? I'm going to ask you a ton of questions. I'm going to interview you. I'm going to talk to your employees. And then I'm going to try to help you communicate to your customers way more effectively. And just try it and do it for free a couple times and use the same skills that you use to write a sermon and, put that into text and try to help them, that way. Or help them with a video script and go, hey, I want to just, work with you on scripting how to communicate what you do more effectively. You interview them, you research them, their industry, their business, and write a video script for them. And then have them record it and see how it goes. And do that for free a bunch of times. And then you go to somebody else and you go, hey, I've got these 5 other people that I've done this for. Here's examples. Here's my portfolio. I charge $5,000 to do this, or $1,500, maybe don't start there, $1,500. I'll do a video script for $200, whatever it is. Make some actual money. And that's going to validate, oh, there is actual this isn't just something that I have a skill in. It's not just something that people would take for free, but now you're showing, hey, there's actual value in the market for this. And if you get paid for something and then you do that enough, now you've got a portfolio that you can now go to somebody and get hired in. Because I don't have a degree, and I got hired in my first like official marketing role that required a degree because I had a portfolio. I'd built websites for people. I'd done ebooks. I'd done landing pages. I, had LinkedIn content I'd done. I had this whole portfolio, and some of it was paid, some of it was free, some of it was stuff I did for myself. But they were really impressed by the fact that I could actually do the job. So if you're looking to do that, you just kind of take those skills, try them. Anyway, kind of went over it. I won't go over it again.
I was just smiling and nodding my head because one thing that I try to encourage people to do is take a serve first mentality. Try to identify some teams, some organizations, some individuals that you want to work with. How could you begin to serve them and bring value to what they're doing? The company that I work for right now, long before I had ever talked to anyone on their team, knew anyone on their team, I learned what they were doing, absolutely loved it, started blogging, and this is just the skill sets that I had. Started blogging, started writing about their product, and started sending them thousands of visitors a month and free traffic to their website. And that opened a conversation up. And it led to even just the chance to say, hey, maybe there's some opportunities for us to work together. And I've been there now for over 2 years, but the pool of opportunity can feel so vast and so deep that you don't know where to start. But again, I think this comes back to values. I think this comes back to what are the things that I'm good at and what are the types of places that I would want to work at, and then how can you begin serving and adding value to demonstrate the competencies and the skill sets you have. And I think your strategy to do that is a great way to start, to even test the waters. Do I have the skill sets to do this? Let me do it for a few people for free and see what the reaction and feedback is.
And you might find that you enjoy it. Like if you're really truly adding value to people, it's fun. Then it's not this like, you don't like, I don't know, there's all these weird ideas that people have, especially in ministry, about making money being bad or evil or grimy. And it can be, if you're taking a totally selfish, me first approach and manipulating people, yeah, that's not cool. But you can actually just get paid to really help people solve serious problems where they are like, I didn't pay you enough to do that. I wish I could have paid you more. Or you didn't charge me enough for this. I would have paid you twice as much. And you're like, that feels really good because you've done something that's really helped them and their business, solved a serious problem for them. And that feels good. And I think there is purpose in that also. I mean, there's value in serving people. One last thing that I'll say, because I know we're getting long here, but if you're trying to make a transition, relationships matter more than almost anything else. Like your skill set definitely helps, but relationships are way more important. And I did not understand that for a long time. And if I could go back and I could do one thing, it would be I would start a podcast or a show, a live show, make it easy on yourself. You don't have to post-produce it. Get StreamYard, reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'll send you the scoop on how to do it. But start a live show and interview people in whatever areas you think you might possibly be interested in doing. And just get to know them. And like part of it is you learning and you starting to figure out whether you want to do that or not. And maybe you think you want to do it. You talk to a couple people and you go, maybe not, right? So part of it's just the research end of it. And you can kind of test the waters that way. But the more important part of it is now you know that person. And if they have a role that comes up that you want to interview for and you've interviewed them on a show, your chances of getting past the first 2 or 3 interviews go way up. And I've had that happen multiple times now myself. Or if you've interviewed 50 people and now you're at the point where you go, hey, I'm ready to make this transition. You have 50 people now that you can reach out to, that you have a personal relationship with in the industry you want to work with, target titles of the types of people you want to work for. And you'll also know, hey, these are the kinds of companies that are awesome to work for. These are the kinds of companies I would never want to go work for. And you're going to get a job way faster. Because really at the end of the day, if you're transitioning like that, somebody's taking a risk, especially if you don't have a portfolio that's really clear and easy to show people. They're taking a huge risk by working with you. Somebody who has a relationship with you is far more likely to take that risk and be willing to help you develop the skills that you need and walk alongside you than if you're just shooting your resume out to to wherever and hoping you land a role.
Joe, these have been great insights, man. I appreciate you taking the time. Where can people find you online if they want to connect with you, learn more about you, how you might be able to help and serve them too?
Yeah, I mean, if you're into marketing, sales kind of stuff, messaging, then follow me on LinkedIn. Just look up Joseph Lewin. If you're listening to this, I have a mustache. You should be able to find me. And then if you're more into like family, outdoor projects, things like that, then at Joseph D. Lewin on Instagram or YouTube, any of those places. I do all kinds of crazy projects on my property that are kind of fun, and talk about fatherhood some on there, and kind of take a little bit more of that angle.
Fantastic. Well, Joe, thanks again, and thanks everybody for tuning in.